Everybody loves tier lists, and a lot of people love Pokemon Vintage White, a recent ROM hack that's really picked up in popularity recently, changing the existing metagame drastically, with almost every single Pokemon being at least somewhat viable. I have hardcore Nuzlocked this game 8 times in total and have completed post game, and am probably the most knowledgeable person about this game in the whole wide world, with hundreds of hours put into this game. In this video I'll be ranking every mon and explaining in depth why every single mon is placed in the tier that they're placed in. Some important points to note is that in this tier list I'm judging a mon's viability for nuzlocking in the big picture. I'll be judging based off of viability for the entire game as a whole, which will be affected by the mon's availability and where you can actually get that mon. Also, I will be taking post game into account, which is the hardest part of the entire game, so that's a really big factor. Any mon that's especially useful in post game will get automatic boost in importance because of that. Overall, it's extremely hard to rank every mon accurately as there's so many factors to encounter for, such as individual differences in IVs, and where exactly you can encounter the specific mon, and how they pair with other specific mons that you can encounter. But I feel like I do a pretty good job at ranking them accurately enough. One big thing to note is that I will not be ordering mons within your tiers, but I will be splitting each tier into segments such as A+, A and A-, to give you a good idea of which mons are generally better than others on average within a given tier. So let's get onto this tier list and strap yourselves in because this is going to be a long ride. Okay, so the first Pokemon here in this tier list is Electrode, and it's definitely going somewhere in S tier. You could argue being upper S tier, but I don't think it's that insane. It has potential to be either S or S-. The reason why this mon's so amazing, it outspeeds almost everything, insanely high special attack. It gets Zap Cannon, which is basically a 140 base power stab move, which it does recall damage, but it doesn't really matter anyways. And you get Lightning Rod, so it makes Elisa pretty free, and even Berg if you're lucky enough to get to that early. I think it can go in S tier. Honestly, it could be an S-, but the only issue is that its IVs can make a big difference. It's a pretty IV in nature reliant mon, because if its speed stat, for example, isn't good enough, it won't be able to outspeed certain threats like Crobat and Gengar, and that could be pretty bad, but it's still a very high tier mon. Electric type and Steel typing with 140 special attack is just too insane. Next up is Executor, and this thing got a pretty big stat buff, and you can get it pretty early on. In that case, it'll be somewhere in A tier. I'd say A or A-. I don't think it's A+, though it could potentially be that good with the right IVs and such. It gets Harvest, which is really good for Lenora. It gets Leech Seed. It has stats that are about on par with like Venusaur. It's got better physical defense. I think it could be a solid A tier mon. It's good for Elisa also. Just very powerful stats, defensive, bulky grass type with Leech Seed and such. Now next up is Marowak, and surprisingly I think this has S tier potential. Now I'm assuming it does have Battle Armor. If it's Lightning Rod, or I guess Rock Head is other ability, it kind of sucks. But if it has Battle Armor, it's an S tier mon, I would say, probably like in the lower boundaries of S tier, because Battle Armor with decent defense and Grubble is just such an insane combination. It's basically Donphan at home, but it's still a really good mon just because of that. It'll be useful for many fights, and Mono Ground is pretty useful as well. Now next up is Hitmonlee, and this is definitely an A. I'd say it could be A-, but I think this could be A tier with the right IVs and natures. Basically, it's got two good abilities, being Unburdened and Reckless, and it hits like an absolute truck, and it's also decently fast, and it makes Lenore pretty free, and it has some relevancy throughout the game. I'll say it could be somewhere in A tier, I think. That's pretty fair. Hitmonchan, however, is maybe A- to B. It's really not as good. I'll probably put it in like the upper end of B. It could be A-. Actually, it's still somewhat useful, but you're just never going to use this over Hitmontop or Hitmonlee. There's just no real reason to use it over those two, and its abilities aren't that good. It gets like flipping Inner Focus, and Iron Fist is okay, but then at that point the other two Hitmons are just better. Actually, I'll put it on B. just because it's power crept by almost every other fighting type pretty much. Now next up is Licklicky. Now this is a really hard mon to get. You can get it on Route 6 and Route 7 I believe, but you're almost never going to get it. Thing is, Licklicky is actually a really good mon. It's got buff defenses and it gets regenerator, so this thing is incredibly bulky. It's not incredibly bulky, but it's pretty damn bulky. And it can heal itself up really well, it gets return. I think it gets some nice status moves as well. I would say this could be an A or A+. I'd say maybe the upper end of A, I think. It's a pretty solid mon. The only issue is that you only get it like in the later parts of the game, and most people are just never going to get it anyways. Next up is Coughing, and to be honest, I'll put this in B tier. It could potentially be A-. It didn't get any stat buffs, which is pretty disappointing. It's mono poison with levitate, which is nice, so it's only got one weakness, but its stats are so power crept, and offensively it just doesn't do anything. You can use it against ground types, I guess. It's got solid physical defense. Its physical defense is actually being power crept. It is good for Will-O-Wisp, and that's pretty much it. So there could be A- potential because of that, but the thing is, you're barely ever going to actually go for this in a Nuzlocke run anyway, so I'll probably keep it in B, though it could be A-. Next up is Rhyperior, and this I will put in A+. Rhyperior is a really good mon. You can get it potential as early as in pre-Berg, and it's just a very solid mon. One person I've actually seen be the Elite 4 rematch and post-game actually brought Rhyperior to their team, so it's a proven Elite 4 mon. Rhydon is pretty useful for Eviolite for early game, and Rhydon also gets Lightning Rod, which is really good for Elisa and Berg as well. But Rhyperior is very powerful. Its stats are insane. It's a physical juggernaut. It's got two good abilities being Solid Rock and Rockhead. Rockhead is absolutely ludicrous because it gets Rock Wrecker, which is basically a 150 base power stab move with no downsides, along with Superpower, which works like it does in Emerald Kaizo. Drill Run, which is just Earthquake but stronger. It's just a very powerful mon, good typing, incredible stats, good abilities, and you can get it early on. And it's got Lightning Rod in form of Rhydon if you're lucky. So it's a very solid mon. Blissey, that's just going S+. The only caveat is that Blissey, you can only get it like late on in the game, after you get Surf. But I think it deserves being S+, purely because it just trivializes every single special attacker in the game. And that's just insane, especially if you give it like Charge Beam and such. Feels almost unfair to use it, to be honest. Actually, like, I could potentially put an S tier, because the reason why is because it's not very good for the Elite 4 rematch. Because they're double battles with a lot of physical attackers, so stall strats don't really work there. So Blissey isn't as insane, and NGetsis have mostly physical attacking teams. So actually, I think in the grand scheme of things, Blissey will go in S tier and not an S+. Purely because you can't really use Blissey that much for boss fights, like Iris. You can use it for Bryson, and you can't really use it for Charon either because he has a lot of physical attackers. It is amazing for like a lot of Victory Road Trainers and such, so I think Blissey deserves a high spot. But because you can't use it for every single boss battle like Lapras, it's not going to be the very top of S tier. Next up is Tangrowth, and this is a solid mon. The only issue is it's really hard to get Regenerator. If you're very lucky, you can get it in Pinwheel for regular grass, but you never want to go for that. I would say it's A+, because if you do get it, it is actually a very powerful mon. I think it gets Leech Seed, I'm not too sure about that, but Regenerator is really good ability, and just really good physical bulk. I would say maybe the lower end of A+, purely because of its lack of availability, but with the Regenerator is a very good mon. Kangaskhan, there's not much to see here, it's a B tier mon. Its stats have been power crept, it didn't get any stat buffs, its abilities don't really do anything for it. It's just a power crept mon, it's mono normal and it serves no real niche. It's got okayish bulk, but it's not a wall. It's got decent attack and speed, but it's nothing insane, it's just power crept by other mons, and because it's mono normal, it doesn't have any like typing niche matchup that you need it for. It's just like a slightly okayish jack of all trades, and there's just, you're always going to have something better for it anyways, and you only get it later on, so it's not good. Its stats are pretty decent, along with good coverage and fake out, which gives it some use, but that's basically it. Kingdra, this is actually a tricky one. So Kingdra, it's good, but it's really not that good, and it's insanely power crept by other dragon types. With Swift Swim, this thing does have use. So if I'm assuming Swift Swim, I'll put in A tier. I think A tier is fair, because good typing, it quad resists fire types, which you will be fighting quite a lot, like Bianca and Sharon usually have them, especially if you're picking Trico, which you should. Dragon type can also be pretty useful for Iris. If you have Swift Swim, it's really good for rival fights, because you can just minute for rain and just go off with Swift Swim. And another reason why Kingdra is good, it's got solid stats, but it's a really good dupe for other mons. For example, it's a dupe for guaranteed Bagon or Dratini in Dragon Spiral Tower. And I think in post game you can also do a dupe and get guaranteed Ducklet. So I think it's probably an honorary A tier because of that. It's not that great in its own right, maybe a little bit lower. Actually, I'll probably put an A- because it's just power crept by other dragon types. Next up is Seeking, and this is definite A+. You could make an argument for S-. Actually, that's not a bad that's actually not a bad idea. I think probably it could be S-. The main reason why is because you get this literally at the very start of this game, and Lightning Rod, and its stat buff. Sure, after Elisa, it definitely loses viability, but because it makes the first 4 gyms almost free, I mean not really free, but it makes Elisa and Burke ridiculously easier. It's so good. The only issue is after Elisa, it is going to kind of peter out in terms of viability. It is really good for a guaranteed counter against Chargestone Ends Electrode with Bulldoze and Aquajet, and it has solid stats. You can use it for Lenora, a lot of the trainers in that gym. It's really good for Berg and a lot of the trainers there. It's amazing against Elisa. If it has Swift Swim, it's still useful also for rival fights and just overworld rain abuse to beat the rivals pretty easily, so that's okay. But if it's Lightning Rod, I think it deserves S-. Next up is Stormy, and I would say A+. It could be S-, but the reason why it's not S- because you get it later on in the game. Well, actually you can get it very early, but this mon is very IV and nature reliant. If it's like Tibin nature with great IVs, it would be definitely somewhere in S tier because it outspeeds so many threats like Gengar and such, which is very good. Stormy has some of the best coverage in the whole game. Late game it gets Thunderbolt, Power Gem, Ice Beam, Surf, Psychic. That's just amazing. It can hit so many mons super effectively. Against N and Getsis, it literally hits everything on those teams super effectively, apart from Metagross. And it can even like somewhat take hits from Metagross also, which is really impressive. But I'll put A+ because its stats aren't that insane. It didn't get a stat buff. And it's just too IV reliant, I would say. Next up is Mr. Mime, and this I'll put in B tier. It's hard to get, and it's just like it's got nice stats. I believe it got buffed if I look here. Mr. Mime. I got the docs here. Technician and Filter. I mean, Filter doesn't really do that much, but big defense buff. It's just a psychic type, which is decent to have and has some moves here. You can beat a lot of poison types and fighting types, and it can maybe take a special hit, but that's pretty much it. I think it can do something potentially, so I'll put it in B tier, but it's really not that useful. You're almost always going to have a better psychic type or a better mon for its situation. It gets good coverage, I guess, with like Thunderbolt and such. Scizor, this is either A+ or S-. Scizor is very good. It gets sturdy, which could be useful, but with Technician is very good mon, very good typing. It can pivot, hit really hard, it's good coverage, can use Metal Burst. I'll probably put it in A+, but maybe like on the upper ends of A+. I think Scizor is just a very good mon. Its stats are a little bit power crept, so it didn't get buffed, but you could use it for Elite Four. I've seen people use it. There are probably other better steel types though, like Aggron and Kingler. That's the only thing holding it back. And Scizor didn't get buffed, but still a very good mon. Jinx is actually a pretty slept on mon. This actually deserves to be in A tier. A lot of people think it's not very good. But you can get this early on in not pinwheel shaky grass, which I would actually recommend going for instead of a fighting type if you can get through early game pretty easily. Jinx got buffed. A lot of people think it's bad because it's not the same as Electabuzz or Electivire or Magmortar, but this thing got buffed. So it's actually on par with those two. It has more special attack, and I think it's actually faster than those two as well, and has a really good ability in Dry Skin. Really good offensive typing. Ice, Psychic. You can use Hail and Blizzard strats for Skyla, which works. Being immune to water types and restoring its HP, it's got decent special bulk. It's pretty fast, hits really hard, and it gets Psycho Boost, which is incredibly powerful. Psycho Boost is just a 140 base power psychic move that deals some recoil, which isn't even that much of an issue. So with like a choice spec, this can just go off and hit incredibly hard. You can also like use it for Iris, for example, and Skyla for baiting strats, because its physical defense being so low actually works to your advantage. It's a pretty useful mon. Immune to water, good offensive coverage, and it becomes pretty useful later on. It's also incredibly useful against Bryson with Dry Skin, because basically if you bait in Wolverine and Lapras on Bryson, they literally cannot touch it, because Blizzard does barely anything to Jinx, and water moves heal Jinx up, and it doesn't care about hail, so Jinx can literally just sit there and stall it really easily. Pretty solid mon. Speaking of Jinx, we got Electivire here, and this is also an A+. Pretty high A+ here, especially if you get this at the start of the game, right before Lenora. With Lightning Rod, Electivire is just incredibly good. Very nice stats. It's now a special attacker in this game. Very potent mon. I can show its stats here. Electivire. You get to level 36, which is really nice. And its stats got buffed, so it's a little bit bulkier. It has insanely high special attack. And Lightning Rod is so useful. Eviolite Electabuzz literally makes Berg and Elisa completely free, and it still has use. It also helps incredibly well against Skyla. So it's just such a good mon. I would really recommend this. It's very powerful, it's got good stats, it's useful. It's incredibly useful early and mid game, and has some use late game as well. Volt Switch shenanigans, gets coverage moves like Flame 4. Very good mon. Magmortar, I would say, is not as good. Out of these three mons, I would say Magmortar is probably the worst, but not by much. Magmortar definitely has use. Similar to Electivire, it got a buff to its stats as well, a slight buff, but it's still a very powerful mon, especially because you can get it really early. It can also get Flash Fire, which is very useful, especially if you get this at not Pinwheel Forest. It's really good for a lot of fights, like for example Bianca's Typhlosion and such. And it's incredibly useful against Berg. I used it once and it went off like crazy. Even Eviolite Magmar could be used. But it's just a pretty solid fire type, but you don't really need fire types that much. It's just, its typing isn't that insane, but because of its good stats and how early you can get it, it's useful because of that. Now next up is Pinsir, and this is hard to say. Honestly, I've never gotten Pinsir. In all the times that I play this game, all the hundreds of hours I've put into Vindub, I've never gotten a Pinsir. I understand that with Moxie, it could be incredibly, well, not incredibly useful, it could be pretty useful at points. You can sweep and go off like crazy with it. Removing the choice items getting removed in a recent patch definitely nerfs it though. I would say probably A, purely because Moxie is an insane ability, but it's really hard to get and you only get it later on. But yeah, I think that's a fair placement. It doesn't have very good moves. Its best 100% accurate move is X Scissor, which 80 base power isn't that insane. Tauros, I would say, is also A or A minus. I would say maybe, probably A minus, but like at the very top. It's got nice stats, it's got solid abilities, but the problem is it's a mono normal, and that's basically it. So all it can do is really use return. And there's other normal types that can outspeed and hit harder, like Swallow, and you get this somewhat late on. You would never go for Tauros anyways. It's a pretty solid mon in its own right, and it could definitely be useful, but it's just one that you don't need very much. Now, Butterfree, I think could be an A tier mon, purely because you get this at the very start of the game, and it is useful for the first 3 gyms, but after that, Butterfree really loses viability, but because of its early game viability, it deserves a pretty solid spot because of that. It's really good against Lenora. It's at that point in the game, it hits really hard. It's actually pretty fast, and it gets Compound Eyes with Sleep Powder, and it's a guaranteed counter for Lenora's Giraffe Rig, which is pretty important. But its stats aren't that great, and it just gets power crept really hard later on. So that's pretty much it. Early game mons usually do have inflated rankings because of their early game viability. Now Gyarados, this thing is somewhere in S tier. I think S- is a fair place. Like, you could make an argument for S. This is a mon, I'll put it here for now, but Gyarados is a mon that you will be using a lot if you get it. Actually, you know what, I could put it here. It has some Elite 4 viability. It's used similarly to how it is in Emerald Kaizo, so if you're an Emerald Kaizo veteran, you will understand why Gyarados is such a good mon. Great stats. Intimidate, which is one of the best abilities in the game. Amazing typing, and typing that pivots incredibly well with one particular mon that I'm going to talk about later on. It's insanely good for pivoting and stalling and abusing shell armor. And it's a pretty easy mon to minute for, so you're always guaranteed this. If you get this before Clay, it's amazingly good. It's a very consistent, incredibly safe mon that will carry you through so many fights. Speaking of incredible S tiers, Lapras S+. If you know about Vintage White in any great detail, you know that Lapras is literally one of the best mons in the game. Lapras is literally top 3. It is that incredibly good. Lapras is absolutely busted. It's just crazy. Stat wise, it got a wee stat buff. It got a slight stat buff. Those stats were already really good. It just got plus 10 to its defense and plus 10 to its special attack. But it gets shell armor. Probably the best ability in a whole game. And it already has 130 HP, 90 defense and 95 special defense. And great special attack. And really good typing. Which is insane. And it gets some of the best moves. It gets Growl, which is basically like infinite intimidate. So let's say a mon would hit Lapras for 100% and one-shot it from full health. If I intimidate it once or growl it once, it now only deals 67% damage. With Protect, Recover, which is another move it gets to basically heal itself up, and Leftovers, Lapras basically can heal itself for 62% every turn. So if you get off like 1 or 2 Grubbles or 1 or 2 Intimidates, Lapras can basically wall out almost literally any physical attacker in the game. Unless it's like maybe a Dragon type with Outrage. Lapras is just so incredibly bulky. It feels like an impenetrable fortress, especially with like 1 or 2 attack drops to the opponent. Recover, Grubble, Protect, good attacking moves. You can use Perish Song also, which is a pretty good strat for forcing the opponent to switch out. It's incredibly good against the Elite 4 and N and Getsis. The only thing that isn't good about Lapras is because it's a pure Stallmon, you can't really use it for the Elite 4 post-game rematch, which is a lot harder than the main game because double battles, and you have to play offensively and proactively. Lapras doesn't work for that too well because it's a Stallmon. And the only other bad thing about Lapras is that you can only get it like after after Skyla, I mean. But even then, you're basically going to be bringing it to almost every single fight, so it's that good. It really is. It deserves S+. It's a proven mon. It's that good. Next up is Vaporeon, and this is probably like, I would say with Water Absorb it's A. Like, it's a pretty uninspired It's yet another bulky water type, but it has good typing, and it's got water absorb. And it's like, do you really want to evolve your Eevee into this? Like, do you really want to turn your unique Eevee into another water type? So that's kind of the balancing factor. You could get this potentially early on before Gym 2. But I feel there's just better options for Eevee, and water is just, mono water is kind of uninspired. You can get like a Wailord instead, guaranteed, and for example Lapras, which just does its job better, but still a decent mon in its own right. You could evolve your Eevee into something better, like Jolteon. This thing's A+. It gets speed boost and volt absorb, and it's not as good as Lightning Rod for sure, but incredibly high speed, great special attack, zap cannon, volt switch. It makes it so useful as a special sweeper. It's not as good as Electrode, but still a very useful mon. Volt absorb is still a pretty nice ability. I think it deserves an A+. It can definitely contribute to a run. Flareon I think also deserves A. Fire type isn't that good. It doesn't have very good coverage. However, if you get this early game, especially with Flash Fire, I think it gets guts. Does it get guts? But this thing can go off really hard. It has some decent coverage. It gets Earthquake and I think Superpower or Close Combat. And one big issue is that its fire coverage is kind of awkward. It gets Flame Wheel and Fire Fang. Then its only other fire move is like Flare Blitz. It doesn't get Blaze Kick for some reason. And its stats did get changed quite a lot, so Flareon's a lot more offensive like it should be. It's incredibly fast. I think it's 110 speed, which is really impressive. But because mono fire is not useful, I think it's a pretty fair spot to put it. Espeon, like, I'll put it in A- because it's just another Psychic type. There's a lot of Psychic types you'll get in early game, and you just don't need it. It's a decent mon in its own right. You can definitely be useful, especially with good IVs, but you're just not going to need this when you have other Psychic types as well. You would always prefer to evolve your Eevee into something else. Then we get Leafeon. Leafeon is kind of an interesting one. Literally no one ever picks Leafeon. But stat-wise, Leafeon is actually not bad. It got buffed. Chlorophyll and Leaf Guard really do nothing for it. It got plus 25 to its special defense, giving it 550 base stat total, which is impressive. For sure, that's pretty good, but it's just a mono grass type, and you don't need it. It's potentially good for clay, I think, in like one or two other fights, but it's just so situational. So I'll say A- purely because of its impressive stats. Otherwise it would be lower in a tier list. But you just don't need it. Glaceon, I think, is A-, or maybe it's better than Leafeon. Glaceon is actually pretty impressive. Plus 25 HP gives it really good bulk actually. Really good, insanely good special attack. And it's a pretty solid ice type, but it's slow. So I'll put it maybe top of A- or like bottom of A tier. But it is an incredible mon. The problem is it's really slow. It's pretty bulky and it's really slow. But mono ice is just not good for walling at all. In something like Jinx, for example, is an ice type with better coverage, better ability, and is way faster and has comparable special defense. So yeah, I think A- is a pretty fair spots. Yeah, Ditto actually, this isn't in the game at all, so I'm just leaving that here. Don't think you can get Ditto at all. Porygon Z, it's yet another normal type. I really don't know. I think putting A because you could get this early on. Maybe A-. The issue with this is that it doesn't get a good move until really late on. And it doesn't have any good type matchup. And it's kind of power crept as well, being mono normal. And its moveset also isn't that good. Its strongest move is Tri-Attack, which is actually really disappointing. I know its abilities are insane and it's great coverage, but honestly I'll put in A-, purely because of its lack of availability. You can get this early on, but then it doesn't get any good moves until later on. I know like getting like Download Ice Beam could be good, but it's not even that fast. I feel like it's just power crept. It's just too awkward to use. If it got like Hyper Voice, for example, it'd be a lot better. But its best stat being 80 base power just isn't good enough. Now, Omastar. Somewhere in S tier for sure. S minus or S, one of these two tiers I think. I think probably S tier. Because its stats are incredible. It got like plus 30 to its speed, so now it has like something like 80 speed. Which is actually it's really fast for a defensive wall. The reason why Omastar is really good, because it's somewhat easy to get early on. It's got insanely good physical defense with shell armor, the best ability in the game. And it gets tickle. You thought like Grubble on Lapras is great, but tickle is even better, because it lowers the opponent's defense. It's very powerful. It's similar to using Intimidate or Grubble to lower the opponent's attack, then just have a mon that cannot be affected by crits. This thing can wall so hard. It can take hits really well, and it hits incredibly hard, and it can outspeed a decent amount of things. Another reason why it's here is because this is a proven mon that is viable for Nengetsis and E4. Not for the E4 rematch though. It's also really good against Chern and such. It pairs incredibly well with Gyarados, because Gyarados it usually baits out, for example, rock moves and such. Omastar is weak to ground and fighting, which it baits out a lot of the times because they're really common type coverages. And Gyarados just eats those moves up like nothing. So it pivots really well with Omastar. You can easily use Gyarados and Omastar to just make any dangerous physical attacker have like -6 attack, then just Omastar can just come in and do whatever the hell it wants. Kabutops is also a similarly good mon. It's not as good because it's more offensive, and offensive mon with shell armor just isn't as good. It's basically Omastar, but it trades bulk for attack. It's got okayish speed, it hits incredibly hard. Kabutops now is 140 physical attack, which is really powerful. And it gets some pretty solid moves. But you don't really need it as a physical attacker. You'd rather have a defender, which is just worse Omastar, I think. Speaking of S tiers, Aerodactyl, it goes in S+. Yep, if you know this game, you know Aerodactyl is just way too good. It's incredibly hard to find, but if you do get it, it is a gem. It will go off like crazy at the end of the game. For E4, Nengetsis, E4 rematch, outspeed so many things. If it's got Rock Head, it's an absolute demon. Head Smash with a Rock Head is just crazy. Outspeeds everything, 150 base power move with no drawback, and you can give it Choice Band. It goes off like crazy. I think in Nengetsis this can actually potentially sweep. It's just such a good mon. If it's got pressure, then it's definitely not as good. Snorlax, and I think, though Snorlax has been power crept, I think A+, maybe the bottom end of A+, is still a fair spot just because of its raw special bulk and thick fat. I know Yawn got nerfed, making it not as good, but Return is still really strong. Really good special bulk. Thick fat gives it some resistances. It can stall at some special attackers. I think it deserves a good spot, though it has been power crept, and legendary birds, we can't get those. Dragonite, I think S- is fair for Dragonite. It's arguably worse than Salamence because it doesn't have Intimidate, and it's slower, but it's a lot bulkier. And it can get multi-scale, which is a really good ability. It actually makes this a really tanky mon, and you can definitely use this for Elite 4. It's just a very powerful mon all round. It's basically Salamence without Intimidate and Slower, but way bulkier. So I think it deserves a good spot because of that. The only issue is it's really hard to get, but it's still very nice. So that's basically Gen 1 completely done. Oh yikes, 2 more generations to go. Meganium, you could potentially get this at the very start of the game. I think it's going to be A-. With Filter, and it gets plus 10 defense, and special attack. It's a bulky backup, and Filter is great. And it's really useful for Clay, for example, in some really niche circumstances. However, that's pretty much it. You're just not going to be using it past that. I feel its typing being Grass Psychic is really bad defensively, and even with Filter you're still going to be in danger of a lot of hits, like dodging crits for example. It's a bulky grasp, but its defensive typing makes it a little bit too hard to use, and there's probably other better options you could use instead. But it does have some niche good matchups. Typhlosion. Honestly, I've never actually used Typhlosion in this game. I think Typhlosion could maybe deserve S-, purely because adaptability eruption with these stats. If you played Renegade Platinum, it's literally the same as it was in Renegade Platinum for some reason. 124 special attack, 101 speed. Yeah. Blast Burn. It doesn't get Eruption, it gets Blast Burn though, which is potentially Eruption but better. It is a 150 base power recoil move, which is insane. You can give it a choice scarf or choice spec, and this should just one-shot pretty much everything. But mono fire isn't that useful, and you do need to be really careful. It deals so much damage that you can only kill like maybe 2 mons and it has to switch out, and you can't really bring it back in for the rest of the fight because it's pretty frail. It'll take so much recoil, but because it hits like an absolute nuke, I think it deserves somewhere in S tier. I think this is fair. You're probably not going to be using it that much, and it's pretty hard to get, but if you do get it, it's insane. Speaking of potentially insane mons that are hard to get, Beedrill. This deserves to be somewhere in S tier. It could potentially be S tier, purely because it's basically like Mega Beedrill. It's with a choice band or like a life orb, it actually hits harder than Mega Beedrill, which is pretty insane. It has really good movesets, really useful typing. I think, actually no, I'll say S tier is very fair because you can literally get this on Route 1, and if you're lucky enough to get Adaptability B at Route 1, it will go off. It goes off against Gym 1, goes off against Lenora. It can do a lot of things for Berg splits, and after that, you're not going to use it for every fight, but the fights you will use it on, it will absolutely shred everything. Really useful typing, makes it great for pivoting and baiting. It outspeeds a lot of things. Hits like a truck. Very useful mon. You can even use U-turn, which is great. It's really good mon. If you get it, you're lucky. Speaking of great mons, for Alligator, I think S- or A+. I think A+ is a fair place. For Alligator is really good in this game. Water Dark, which is great typing. Dark types are one of the best typings in this game. Slightly buff stats. I think it's just got like +5 attack, and Intimidate, very good ability. It's a useful water type, physically bulky water type with Intimidate, and it's a dark type, which is one of the best types in the game. Really good for key fights like Clay, which is kind of a gatekeeper fight. And you can use this for Elite 4, it has been used. Even in Get Sisters, a little bit of potential. It's also really good offensively. Like, if it's Torrent, you can do some like Torrent shenanigans where you trigger it and go off with it. You also get some pretty solid coverage. You can use like Water Pledge, Ice Punch, Crunch, Aqua Tail, Superpower, I think it's Aqua Jet. It's just a useful mon. And it's decently easy to get. You'll definitely want it for sure. Next up is Ferret. And this is A, maybe A+ depending. I think it could be A+ really. If it's like Pog IVs, I think it could be A+. Everyone sleeps on this mon, but its stats are incredible. This mon is so slept on. It gets Adaptability in these stats, which is basically legendary tier when you think about it. If you think of like a Mew that has 100 in every stat, its special attack doesn't matter, but its other stats are almost at 100. But when you consider Adaptability, I've calculated its physical attack with normal moves is essentially hitting with 115 attack for normal moves when you consider the 33% boost that you get from Adaptability. So it kind of is legendary tier. It's almost like using a pseudo legendary, and you can get it at Route 1, and it also gets Body Slam, which you can delay for to get it earlier. It gets an 85 base power move for Lenora, and it gets Return 100 base power move for Berg, which is insane, along with Quick Attack and Flame Wheel to beat Scizor. It's incredibly impactful for the first 3 gyms. Only issue is it will lose relevancy. I think it goes in A tier purely because it loses relevancy. Actually, or maybe A+, maybe like at the top end of A, I think. Purely because it loses relevancy, but its raw stats and raw power means that it can still have some use in mid to late game. Purely because of it. Actually, you know what, fuck this put here. And its early game, and yeah, its impact early game, it can just carry you through completely. So very good. Noctowl, I think probably A-. It's an early game mon and it can be really helpful for early game, but after that, you'll probably just drop it for something else. It gets compound eyes and good special bulk, but it just doesn't have a very good niche. There's just so many better walls you can use. Ledian, I think it's a fair mon to put in A tier. It's a really good mon. It's not as good, it's like Beedrill, but just not as good. It's similarly fast and has a similar attack stat, but it doesn't have adaptability. It gets Technician, which doesn't really do much for it. It helps a little bit with Bug Bite, but that's basically it. In Iron Fist does give this some late game viability. It's really useful for early game because you can get Ledian for Lenora and it's good for Berg. It counters Lenora's Girafarig and it counters a lot of grass types, for example. But later on, with Iron Fist, it could be pretty useful because you get access to the elemental punching moves, which are 80 base power. So Ledian has just insane coverage. And with Iron Fist, it can take out a lot of things really well. But that's kind of its niche. So because of that, I think it deserves being A tier. It's not that insane. Ariados, this thing, it deserves either S- or A+, purely because huge power. Slight stat buff and huge power makes it insane. Like it could be S-. I think that maybe like the very top of A+. And the only reason why is because for things like Elite Four and Engetsis, its typing holds it back, I would say. That's the only problem with Ariados. Its offensive and defensive typing just aren't as insane. Like Beedrill's probably better, I would say. 80 speed, it's not that fast. Its attack is humongous, but there's other better huge power mons you can use instead, like Mawile and Medicham. And Beedrill's probably just a better mon, but I think purely because huge power and that much attack, along with Sucker Punch. Actually, Sucker Punch could put it S-, but I think top of A+ would be pretty fair. Lantern, A+ mon. It got buffed bulk, really bulky mon as is. Volt Absorb, Water Absorb. You can get it early on, really good moves for Lenore like Volt Switch and such. Counters a lot of electric types like Pidgeot, which is a big threat. Really good mon, not much need to explain there. If you played Emerald Kaizo, you know why it's a beast. Togekiss, A tier. You can get it early on, it's really powerful, but it kind of loses value later on. Normal flying isn't anything that special. Xatu, I would say, is probably E tier. Now, personally, I never use Xatu in my run, but it's still a really important mon. The reason why Xatu is important is, one, it's a really good counter for Lenore's Girafarig, and it will be useful in that split. It's also a little bit useful for Berg split, but two, it's a guaranteed tailwind for Skyla. Xatu makes Skyla completely free, assuming you have like one or two other mons which are really easy to get, like Armaldo. So yeah, it makes the hard part at Lenore split free, and it makes Skyla free. So purely because of that, and like one or two other contributions, I think it's a pretty fair place to put it because you can get it really early on and it will contribute bits, but outside some few really important fights you just won't be using it at all, so it kind of balances it out. Ampharos, I think this deserves being A-. Its stats are really power crept, but they're still okay-ish. It's useful because Electric Dragon is pretty nice. It can counter some electric types. It gets slow Volt Switch. It gets Static, which is a pretty good ability, especially if you get Maripat Route 5. You can Static with it for like Pidgeot and such. So it's a useful mon, but stats aren't that insane, but its ability and uniqueness kind of balances it out. Azumarill deserves A+ spot, purely because you can get this like really early on in the game before Lenora. Its stats are incredible. It got plus 10 HP and a big attack buff, and with huge power, this thing's an absolute demon. Early game Marill is incredibly powerful. It's probably Ferret, but better. It's a mono water, but it's decently bulky. It's really bulky for early game. It hits like an absolute monster truck with Rock Smash to just pummels Lenora. And another really important thing for Trico runs is it gets Rain Dance by level up, and that is very, very useful. It makes the Chern fight of Route 4 free. It's also a really good mon against like Clay, and there's this one Sun Trainer in Charged Stone Gauntlet that's mandatory, which this is really good for. Rain Dance is a pretty useful niche and really good stats. It complements Trico really well. It also enables other Swift Swimmers to do stuff. 80 base power attack with huge power is incredible. It gets Aqua Jet, Ice Punch. Such a useful mon. Really good. Now we have Sudowoodo, and this I think is just A-. It could potentially be B tier, to be honest. Like, purely because I think the reason why it just probably deserves B tier is because, if I recall correctly, you only get this like really late in the game, like Mistralton Cave, and by that point you're just not going to use it at all. If you got Sudowoodo for like Lenore Split, it would be really good by then, but it's Grass Rock, which isn't that great, so it doesn't resist things like poison and flying anymore, and you just get it too late in the game usually to get much use of it out of it, and there's just so many other better rock and steel types and mons that can do its job but better. Jumpluff I think deserves to be A-. It looks really good on paper, but it's not that good. It's just more of a special sweeper, but it doesn't even have great moves. Its strongest move is like Air Slash and Giga Drain. Like, you don't want to risk Hurricane on this, which isn't that useful because those moves aren't strong enough to KO things consistently, and you don't want to be taking hits with Jumpluff. One thing that Jumpluff is good at is Sleep Powder, and you can do prankster shenanigans with Leech Seed and U-turn pivots, and you could use Grass Knot against Clay. It's kind of like Meganium, where it's good for certain niche uses, but that's literally it. Outside those niches, you're not going to use it. It is decent stats, but that's it. Oh yeah, these gens are actually mixed up, so there's still more Gen 1 ones. But Pidgeot, this deserves A+. You can get it at the very start of the game, and you can delay this to get Thunder before Skyla, and I know that's a lot of work, delaying for Thunder, but the reward is very high. It's really good. Pidgeot is just a powerhouse. 115 special attack, good speed, electric flying typing is incredibly good. Offensively is really useful. No guard with Thunder and Hurricane makes it really powerful. Along with Heat Wave and Focus Blast, and you get Volt Switch, and you get Tailwind, which makes Skyla completely free. Pidgeot on its own can basically trivialize Skyla. The problem with Pidgeot is that it's really hard to use early game if you get it at Route 1, but you can also get it at Chargestone Cave and Driftvale Bridge, and you can even Static Minute for it. But if you delay it, it's actually a very good mon. You just have to like get through early game with a Pidgey delay, but it's incredibly powerful. And another thing is Pidgeot has been proven in the Elite Four rematch. Someone actually beat Elite Four rematch with Pidgeot on the team. They put in a lot of work, so it's a proven viable endgame contender. So very good mon. Ambipom I feel is maybe A-. I would say A- is fair. Technician, like normal type, like normal type sweeper, just isn't that useful. It's like Tauros. There's just other mons that can sweep but better. Like if you're against a water type, you'll use a fast electric type or grass type. If you're against a psychic type, you'll use a fast dark type, which you will have. Normal type just isn't good against anything in particular. But Technician is really fast, and Technician Fake Out with like normal gem return, like Life Orb return for example, yeah, it could deal some good damage. So I think it has some use because of that, and U-turn I guess, but it's just not that useful. It's probably better than Kangaskhan, but that's pretty much it. Sunflora I think is A-. I know you can get this at Route 3, which is pretty early, and it's pretty useful against like Lenora, and it's pretty useful against Elisa, and maybe it gets Berg as well, but after that you're just not going to be using it that much. Fire Grass is not very good defensive typing, and Flash Fire can be very useful, but it's just too situational I feel. And its stats are much better this time, but I feel it just loses its viability after early game. Mega I think A tier, same as in regular game, just solid stats. Speed boost with Protect is very good. It basically has like infinite speed, and it hits really hard. Good typing, and it gets U-turn. It has like decent coverage too. Useful mon, very good early game, and it stays useful throughout the game. Quagsire I think is maybe B tier, to be honest. Like, Actually, I think A minus purely because it has some niche uses, but that's it. It's good for clay splits. It takes like a lot of the really strong head smashes, and it has water absorb, and it gets like recover and such. And you can use it for early game, but that's literally it. I don't see it being very useful after that. So I think A minus, because of its few really strong points, kind of balances out a mon that's otherwise just going to be swept to the side for the majority of the game. I think that's pretty fair. Haunch Crow. This is pretty controversial, but I think Haunch Crow, though you get it late game, Haunch Crow definitely has S minus potential. Purely because its viability for Elite 4 and Elite 4 rematch. It is incredible for Elite 4 rematch, and that is important because it's the hardest fight in the game. It's similar to Firo, I guess, but it's arguably better. Very strong Sucker Puncher. It get Prankster, Will-O-Wisp, Super Luck. It's a very solid mon. I think it's really selectable, and I just like its design. It could be A plus purely because of how late you get in the game. I think S minus. I think that could be fair, to be honest. I think that's fair. Miss Magus, I think, probably deserves being A tier. Purely because Mono Ghost with Levitate is pretty unique, and it got a decent stat buff, and it gets really good coverage. Power Gem, Energy Ball, Shadow Ball, I think Dark Pulse, Thunderbolts. Pretty useful moves. It gets some nice status moves like Will-O-Wisp, which you can use with Wide Lens. Pretty fast too. Useful mon. It's immune to some types. Unknown, probably C tier. Like, you literally get it at the very end of the game. You can get it at Route 10, and you're guaranteed to get it against any Getsus. You can use it as sacrificial fodder for post game. It has 90 in all of its stats, unknown. So it's like not that bad. But its moveset is so limited. I actually used it once unironically in a fight in post game, but that was it. So yeah. There's probably one mon that's even worse than it, but unknown is just such a meme. Wobbuffet. I think Wobbuffet deserves being an S tier. Now, I don't think I've never used Wobbuffet in this game, and most people will never use this. It's possible to get this at the start of the game before Lenora. If you do that, that is absolutely incredible. But it's just most people will never get it. But if you do get it, it's actually a very good mon. I think you could maybe have S tier potential. If I recall correctly, this thing has incredible defenses. This thing's defenses are absolutely insane. Why not? The Wobbuffet. Is it two B's? What the hell? How does it spell Wobbuffet? Okay, Wobbuffet. 200 HP, 19 both defenses. That is incredibly bulky. Oh my god. That is so bulky. It gets Encore, Charm, Counter. I think it's good potential to be an S tier mon, really. Purely because those stats are just so incredible. But then again, it's such a reactive mon, and I think S minus because it's really, really hard to switch it in. And it's just such a reactive mon. I think you have to be really careful how you use it and be extremely careful of crits. You can use it in every fight and guarantee like 1 or 2 KOs, and I feel like that's kind of it. So I think S minus is fair. It's not that broken, but it can still be very useful. Girafarig, B tier for sure. You can get it like right after Lenora, and Sap Super is pretty solid. But it's just such an underwhelming and power crit mon. Normal Psychic doesn't do much. There's so many better normal and Psychic types. It's just not useful. It's not even that good for when you get it, because you're not going to use it for like any of the gyms that are coming up. It's like a Psychic type that can hit decently hard, so you'll find some use like beating Golbats and such, and like Pinwheel, and like you'll find 1 or 2 situations. Maybe Sap Super can be useful, but that's really it. Fortress, I think this deserves A+. You can guarantee this on Route 6, which is a decent option. This used to be a definite S tier mon, incredibly important, but because it got nerfed to where it no longer has spikes and toggle spikes, it's just nowhere near as good as it used to be. But still great mon. And Bug Steel with good defense. and volt switch means it's at least somewhat useful. It's a pretty good pivoter, good typing. There's not much else to say. Dunsparce is a C tier mon. Even like for Lenora, it's not even that good. It got no stat buffs. You could maybe use it against like Lenora's Lugatug, and that's literally it. It sucks. Gliscor deserves A+. People think it's S tier. I don't think it's S tier because its stats didn't get increased, so its defense is... It's really not that physically bulky now compared to other mons. But Toxicale is still really good, and it's got good typing, and it can U-turn and fly and protect and earthquake. It's a good mon, but it's just not that insane, I think. Its stats have been power crept, because everything else has been buffed so much. Raticate. Now, Raticate... It's such a hard mon to judge. I think Raticate and A- or A tier, I think. One of these two tiers I think are fair. Potentially it could squeeze into A tier purely because you get at the start of the game. The problem is Raticate, I feel, is potentially Lightning but worse. Raticate gets guts or adaptability. Adaptability Raticate is basically Ferret but worse. It's literally Ferret but faster and worse in every other way. Eradicate. It's got a tiny bit more attack. It's got more speed, but its defenses are way worse. So it really can't take hits. So it really depends. Like, it could be good with Double Edge. Actually, like, Double Edge gives it a niche, I guess. You can use it to nuke, like, two things and switch out. Sucker Punch is really nice. Guts with Facade is incredibly powerful, but that's only good for, like towards the end of the game when you get Facade anyways, and Lightning is probably better. I think it's power crept by Lightning and Ferret, but in its own right, it's still a solid mon. I think if you know how to use it properly and has good IVs and such. Granbull I think deserves A-. Guts, Intimidate, really useful. Its stats are whatever, but you can get it at the start of the game, and it gets Fighting type, which is great for Lenora. But it'll probably start to get less and less viable as the game goes on. You'll have a few niche uses, but that's it. Quillfish, this thing. S-, I feel. That's a pretty controversial ranking, but Quillfish is so underrated. Good stats. It hits decently hard. It gets Gunshot, which is really powerful. It's just 120 base power poison move with no drawbacks, 100% accurate. Pretty fast. Solid defense. Gets Intimidate, which is one of the best abilities in the game. Really good typing. Water Poison is so good. It gets Black Sludge, which is just a free leftovers. Remember, you only get one leftover in the whole game, so Quillfish can just bypass that. Switch in, Intimidate something, get Black Sludge, Protect, get more Black Sludge, switch out. After like 2 Intimidates, you go into your Shell Armor user like Lapras. Is so useful. This has been used for Elite Four. I've used this for Elite Four. So it's a proven endgame mon. In some cases, it's actually better than Gyarados, I would say. It's potentially... It could be here, actually. I think in some cases, it is actually better than Gyarados. In some cases, you prefer Gyarados. Like, it depends on what you're trying to pivot around. If you're trying to, like, bait out, like, for example, a rock... Like, for example, if you have a Kingler, you'd want Gyarados to bait out a rock move. So in that case, better. Like, Quillfish wouldn't pair as well because, like, it can't switch because they share ground type weakness and such. But Quillfish is a very underrated one. I think people sleep on it much. Shuckle. This is a mon that I don't think you can get access to this mon until, like, post game or something. It's incredibly hard to get. Its HP is really high. And it's got okay stats. Maybe A- just because it's so hard to get. Honestly, this could have potential. I feel like it's only good. It's definitely only good as like a defensive wall, but there's other mons that could just wall better, like Shell Armor. You'll have like Shell Armor mons by that point. Its defensive typing isn't that good either. I feel like it's too niche and hard to use. Its raw HP and defenses are pretty useful, but that's basically it. I feel like Agon, for example, would just be better. Heracross also is an A tier. You get it later on. Actually, you can get this at Pinwheel, in which case it's really good, but Guts and Skill Link. With Skill Link, you get Arm Thrust, Bullet Seed, Pin Missile, and Rock Blast. Basically, 125 base power moves with no drawback. That also has multiple chances to crit, that's incredibly good. Guts is also insanely strong with close combat. Solid stats, even though it didn't get buffed. Heracross is just a good mon. It's a good fighting type, it really is. Good stats. Weavile, this thing is S tier. S minus or S? I think I'm going to go on the limb and say S tier, which is quite controversial. Weavile is such a surprising mon. It really is. Incredibly fast, very powerful. One of the highest attack dark types in the game. Incredibly good offensive typing. It's such a good glass cannon. Psychic Dark. Dark is one of the best types in the whole game. Outspeed so many things, it's really hard. Technician, which is another one of those really incredibly good abilities. It gets Ice Shard, Low Sweep, Feint Attack, and the most important thing, Beat Up. Technician Beat Up is actually ludicrous. It's so good in this game, it feels like you're using a cheat code, especially with Choice Band. How Beat Up works is that Beat Up, essentially, you're attacking your opponent 6 times, and all of those hits are Technician boosted. I can't remember the exact damage formula for Beat Up, but it's based on a team member's attack, like over like 20 plus 10 or something. So I think when Weavile uses Beat Up, when Weavile attacks, it's something like 20 damage. I think it's like, no, it's like 18 damage. Then it gets calculated for all of your other mons. So if you have like Armaldo and Sceptile and such really high attack demons, it'll deal like 16, 17, upwards of 20 damage per hit. So Weavile can basically deal like, it can pretty consistently deal over 100 damage with Beat Up. That also has 6 chances of critting. That gets Technician boosted. That is incredible. It's so fast and strong. Beat Up against Elite 4 goes off completely. It's insanely good. I love this thing. Technician is insane, right? Technician is definitely not as good. Still useful though. But yeah, such a good mod. Ursaring. Yikes. Ursaring got a nice stat buff, I think. It gets Guts, of course, which is insane. 90 speed. Pretty solid stats. Hits like a tactical nuke with Facade. So yeah, you just use Guts with it. You can get this, I think, before Lenore, but you probably don't want to go for normal grass anyways. If you get early game, it can be useful, but it's not going to be that insane until mid game. I think maybe A-. I think A+, purely because once you do get Facade, it's an absolute monster. It really is. Ursaring has solid stats already, like okay defenses, pretty solid speed, good, really good attack. You can use Return and such, close combat, Zen Headbutt, or I think Earthquake. It's a solid mod, I think. My cargo has potential for S- or A+. I think S- my cargo is actually like maybe in the bottom end of S-. I think that's fair. My cargo is incredibly bulky. Water Fire with Water Absorb is incredible. Buffed accuracy, Will-O-Wisp, Recover. You can use like Blast Burn, and you can use Scald. You have like Earth Power, Fire moves, Lava Plume. It does so many things. You can use setup moves with it, but I usually don't allow setup moves. My cargo is just so good. It destroys a lot of physical attackers. It destroys like almost every single water type in the game. Its stats are that good to where it's a really good physical wall, and it can just burn so many things. Maybe A+ or S-, somewhere between those two, I'm still undecided. Mamoswine, I'll say A-, purely because despite getting a nice stat buff, got a nice stat buff, but its stats are still kind of awkward. So it's got, you can use it as a mix attacker. It's still not that bulky, it's not that fast, and it can hit hard, but it's got bad defensive typing. I feel it's kind of similar to Jinx, but not as good as Jinx. Jinx has better movesets and typing and ability. So I feel like it's sort of a worse Jinx. It's definitely a useful mon though. For when you get it, you'll usually get this at like cold storage. So you will get use out of it by the time you get it. But it's not something you need. Like if you lose Mamoswine, it's not a tremendously big deal. Corsola, I would say maybe B tier. It gets Regenerator, which is really good, but its typing is solid, I guess. But you have so many other rock, steel, and water types at that point. Do you even need Corsola? Its stats are barely even better. Yeah, B tier is fair. Good ability, but it's so power crept and you get it late on. Octillery. This thing's a B tier, unfortunately. You can get this at Pinwheel Forest, but its stats are so underwhelming. It's like one of the worst stat mons in the game, I think. If it's Sniper, it's almost literally useless. It's basically just a glorified sack. You might use it for Berg Split in like Elisa Split, but that's it. You'll basically just use this as like a potential sack. You'll probably sack it against Clay, so at least it can contribute something to your run. Like it dies to Clay, so the rest of your mons can survive. But if it has the one good thing about Octillery, its stats are so underwhelming. It got no stat buff apart from like plus 30 speed, and that's it. The only good thing about Octillery is that it's got great coverage, and if you have Swiss Swim, it's pretty damn useful against the rival fights, especially like Twistmouth and Charon, because you can like use Swiss Swim, one-shot Glalie, bait and Pidgeot, use Hydro Pump, one-shot Pidgeot and Rain. But that's basically its only good niche in the game. Apart from that, it's literally out power crept by everything else. Probably the same goes for Delibird. I could put Delibird in A- purely because you get it before Skyla splits, and it could be useful for Iris, but that's literally it. Apart from that, you will just never use this. It's such a power crept mon. Mantine, definite A tier, potential like bottom of A+. You can get it right after Gym 1, really good special defense, water absorb. It's good for Lenora, it's good against Berg. It counters a lot of special attackers, and it gets U-turn as well. You can also, if you encounter a pre-evolved Mantine, it can also get Roost, which is really good. Actually, I think A is fair. It's good, but it's not insane. It can get Swiss Swim as well, which is useful. Houndoom, I think Houndoom deserves A+ tier. That's kind of stretching it, maybe A tier, but I think the Dark type is what sets it apart from other fire types. It can get Intimidate or Flash Fire, which are both really useful abilities, and it gets Beat Up, which is incredibly good. It's not Technician, still a pretty strong Dark move. It's stronger than Crunch, and it doesn't really take Houndoom's attack into calculation, so it makes it a pretty consistent move to use. Gets Energy Ball, Dark Pulse, Sludge Bomb, Flamethrower, Dark Pulse. It's a pretty solid mon. I think maybe it's more like top of A tier. I think top of A tier is like a fair way to put it. It's also good against Lenora and Berg. Skarmory, hard to say. I think Skarmory is just more of an A tier mon. Maybe A+. I think it's also like another one of those like top of A tier mons. The thing is, it's really power crept by other steel types. It's not as good defensively because it's a steel type, and it doesn't really wall out fighting types. It doesn't wall out rock types that much. It doesn't wall out water types that well either. Its HP is a lot lower. You would rather use a Kingler, for example, and it doesn't do that much. You'd much rather use an Aggron, which is better at taking physical hits, or a Kingler, which is much better at taking special hits. It's still a solid mon because of its unique typing, but I feel like there's just other better steel type mons you can use. Fearow, S- for sure. I make a point to reset for Fearow. It's more like Poco. It's such a good mon. It's a proven Elite 4 monster. It's really good for the first 3 gyms too, and it will see some use after that. But for Elite 4, and even for post game potentially, Fearow just shines so much. Flang Dark, like Honchcrow, with Intimidate, is incredibly good for the main game Elite Four. It trivializes Caitlyn completely. It really does. You can do some really funny pivots like Choice Scarf, U-turn on Alakazam, go into something like Flygon that's immune to Thunderbolt, bait Psychic, go back into Fearow, then U-turn again, KOing the Alakazam, then you just go into something else like a Sceptile and you just sweep from there. Intimidate makes it also really good for Grimsley. You can hit like Grumpig and Muck super effectively. You can Intimidate stall the Tyranitar on Grimsley's team, which is a big threat, by pivoting between like Aggron and Fearow. It's also really good against Chantal because you just use like Knockoff and Night Daze. Night Daze is 140 base power physical dark move, which is incredible. It gets U-turn, Drill Run, Breathe Bird, Fly. Knockoff is such a good move. It's really good early game. You can sweep Berg with it. Really good dark type. You can get it at the start of the game, which is so good. It's also good for post game too. That alone makes it incredibly useful. Speaking of S tiers, Donphan. Probably S plus. Actually, I think S plus is fair. It's that good. Donphan got a very slight stat boost to its special defense, but what makes it insane? Well, if you get it early game, you hit the jackpot. Good stats. The best ability in the game, Battle Armor, and it does not get Grubble. No, it gets Charm, which is even better. This thing gets flipping Battle Armor Charm. That is ludicrous. Like, let's say for example, Donphan gets hit for let's say it gets hit for like 60% of its health. Donphan then uses Charm, and now it's only taking like 30% of its health. You get 6% back. The leftovers you protect, get another 6% back. You're at 42%. You get hit for 30%, putting you on 12%. You use Charm again, then you get leftovers, use Protect again, you're at 24%. Donphan can then just use Rest, because it can take another hit. Charm is just such a good move. It's like Intimidate on crack. It's Grubble but better. After one Charm, Donphan is pretty much immortal to physical attacks, apart from like super effective moves. Anything that's not super effective, after being charmed, will just bounce off of Donphan. It's proven to be good for Elite Four. It's an incredibly good mon. You will use it in so many fights. Good stats, good typing. It's really good against Clay. It tanks all the head smashes. Such a good mon. The same can't be said for Statler, B tier. It gets Intimidate and Sap Sipper, which are good, but that's it. It's really underwhelming apart from that. It's like Giraffe Rig, which is kind of sad. Not much else to say there. Smeargle, now you'll actually be really surprised. I know this is really surprising, but Smeargle really is an S- mon. The reason why is because Smeargle, it gets access to huge power, and it actually has 100. No, I'm just fucking. Yeah, D tier. D tier. Smeargle, if you play this game, you know why it's that low. You just know. Hitmontop, A minus, potentially A tier. I think it could potentially be an A tier, purely because you get it really early on, and with Intimidate, you can use it for many fights. But I feel like it gets power crept, to be honest. I feel like it gets power crept. Like after Clay, you're just not going to use it, but because it's so useful until Clay, I think it deserves A tier because it will contribute to your run. After all, what's the point of a Nuzlocke if you're just not going to get past early game? I think that's fair. Mill Tank, B tier. Barely any stat buffs. Thick Fat is fine. It's a mono normal type, which isn't good at anything. It's not that. It's fast, but it's not that fast. It's hard, but it's not really a sweeper. It's got decent physical bulk, but it's not even that bulky, and it can't even take like super effective hits. It's just not useful. So many better mons. T-Tar, T-Tar deserves to be somewhere. I think S minus for T-Tar is also pretty fair. Maybe a little bit higher. Like I feel it's kind of hard to say exactly where it would be. I think S minus is fair. Battle Armor Tyranitar is pretty disgusting. The only issue with T-Tar is that its defensive typing with battle armor is pretty bad. It's pretty hard to use against Elite Four. So quite a lot of fighting type coverages and ground type moves. But it's pretty useful because of its raw stats in coverage, in typing, dark type also, in battle armor. Pairs with Tyranitar, it beats fighting and ground, which Gyarados can switch into. Then you can switch back into T-Tar, for example. Solid mon. Well, really good mon actually. Arbok, B-tier mon. Unfortunately, you can get it at the start of the game. It's good for Lenora, it's good for Berg, and it's okay for Elisa. But apart from those 3 fights, you'll barely ever use it. After that, it'll just sit in your box. Without Intimidate, Arbok is absolute garbage. You will just never use it at all. It sucks. It's got useful typing, but its stats are just so underwhelming. And the one good thing is that it gets Black Sludge, which is nice with Intimidate, but Arbok's stats are so bad. Even with Intimidate, you still die to crits all the time, unless you have insanely good IVs. If it's like Impish with perfect IVs, then yeah, it could definitely move up, you could definitely have some use. Intimidate is always good to enable your Shell Armor ones, but apart from that, it's just not that good, fortunately. I think that's like almost all the, yeah, I think we're on Gen 3 now. Oh boy, Sceptile. Sceptile is top of S tier. Yep, Sceptile is probably the best mon in the entire game. If I lose Sceptile, I reset the game essentially. Sceptile is that good. Actually, yes, I will say Sceptile is absolutely the best mon in the whole game. You get it at the start of the game. It's a starter. Because it's a starter, you can literally reset in save state for a perfect Sceptile every single time. Adamant 30, almost 31 IVs in every stat. Incredible. It's got good stats too, as well with its stat buff. Grass Dragon, incredible typing. Technician, incredible ability. Movesets? It gets Fake Out with Technician. And it gets U-turn in things like Strength, in Cuts and Bullet Seed. Most importantly, it gets Dual Chop. It gets effectively a 120 base power stab move that hits twice, breaking sashes and sturdies. It also has 2 chances to crit, and it also has no drawbacks whatsoever. And you have Fake Out for extra free damage on top of that. And you have a hell of a lot of attack with its really good IVs and adamant nature, which you should be resetting for. And it outspeeds almost everything in the game. It's that good. And its coverage in typing allows it to take out so many threats. You will use this for almost literally every single boss fight in the game, or you can at least bring it to every single boss fight in the game, apart from like Berg. It's that good. It's good against Lenora. It can beat Slacking 1v1. It's really good against Elisa because it outspeeds a lot of things, like Pidgeot, and it doesn't care about ledger type attacks. It's really good against Clay because it one-shots Dugtrio through its Focus Sash, which is incredible. Against Charge Zone N, it guarantees 2 KOs against his team, his first 2 mons. It's a good bait against Skyla. It's really good for Elite Four. For the main game Elite Four, it's a really good mon. It's good for N and Getsus. It can like one-shot Blaziken with Choice Band Dual Chop, which is like insane. It's not even super effective. Almost all the time, it's like 97% minimum. And most importantly, if you're doing post-game Elite Four, which is the hardest fight in the game, Sceptile is literally the #1 best mon in the whole game for it. It's not even close. It goes off so hard. Against Alter, Sceptile literally guarantees a KO against his first 3 mons. It KOs Volcarona through its Focus Sash. It KOs his flipping Zekrom, which is incredibly bulky, and it KOs a Zoroark. It's just such a good mon. If you play this game, you will know why it's so good. If you've seen my other videos where I talk about Sceptile, you'll know why it's good. It must be said. Blaziken, A+. I know it used to be S tier for sure, but without speed boost, Blaziken is a shadow of its former self. However, sheer force makes it a lot stronger. It's nowhere near as fast though, which is a problem. But the mere fact it's a starter and you can GMO it for perfect IVs in nature, like with a jolly nature, it still outspeeds a lot of things and sheer force makes it stronger than ever. Blaziken is pretty monstrous under the right circumstances. You can use close combat, sheer force, flare blitz. I think it gets thunder punch. It gets rock slide, like rock smash. It's a very powerful mon. You can use it against Chargestone N and you take out the Pro Pass. Then with Jolly Blaziken you can actually one-shot Pidgeot with strength. Then you bait in Kingler and you one-shot that too. Then you bait in Metagross and you one-shot that too. Chargestone N is one of the hardest fights in the game. Blaziken literally trivializes it. I think because of its pretty good GMO stats and incredible power. It's fast, but it's not that fast, but it's super hard and has decent coverage. I think it deserves A+. You'll use it for the whole game. Swampert is by far the worst starter. I think E tier. It's not a very good mon in its own right. It's really not. It's just another bulky water type. But because it's a starter and you can GMO it, you will be using it for early game and beyond. It's really good for clay splits. It can take really strong rock moves like head smashes, which you will be taking throughout the game. And that's mainly it. Like, you take electric moves. You could use it against rival if you manip for overworld rain. And that's really it. It's such a situational mon. It's nowhere near as good as the other two starters, but it still can do some decent niches, like Quagsire, but better, so I think it's fair. Mightyena, I will say, is A tier. I know people dunk on Mightyena, but because you get at the start of the game, it's a dark type, it can have Intimidate, Quick Feet is actually okay, and it can use Sucker Punch. It's automatically useful. You can bring Mightyena to Elite Four if you need to. Sucker Punchers are always useful. Dark types are one of the best types in the game because there's so many Psychic types and Ghost types that you have to fight. You could even use something like Choice Band with Quick Feet procs to outspeed and destroy a lot of Psychic types. It's just very useful. It's probably one of the more underwhelming Dark types, but Sucker Punch does balance it out. So it is useful and you can use it for Elite Four if you need to. Linoon, I would say A tier because it's Raticate but slower, a little bit bulkier and significantly more powerful, the 115 attack. It also gets extreme speed. I would say maybe like A-, and I'll put it in the same tier as Raticate. Because you get at the start of the game, if you get Facade, it's absolute demon mode. Hits super hard with Guts Facade. That's basically it. Beautifly's B tier. It's really sad. Even for a Route 1 mon that you can use for the whole game, it still sucks. It's literally Butterfree but ridiculously worse. Butterfree with the worst moveset, stats and abilities, essentially. In no status moves, it just sucks, unfortunately. It's not even good for Lenora. It's not even good for Berg, that's so sad. Dustox, however, not in B tier, no way. A+ for sure. Potential S- tier actually, but I think A+ is fair because it does fall off at the end of the game. Dustox has good stats, multi-scale, which is incredible on it. It's a poison type, so it gets Black Sludge. It's one of the only mons in the game that gets Toxic, one of the best moves in the game. It gets Protect by level up, I think. It gets Moonlight. It has self-sufficient healing, it can whittle down anything with Toxic. It's multi-scale, you can use U-turn to pivot out. It does so many things. It's such a good mon, Dustox. Good defensive typing, it can completely destroy like other Sceptiles and such. Really good early game and mid game. It's only like more late game that starts to fall off. I don't know why Raichu's here. Raichu, I think Raichu deserves A+, purely because you can get it right before Lenora. Decent electric type, and it has Lightning Rod. I feel like it's potentially Electivire, but worse. It's Electivire, but faster. It's Electivire with Better speed, but worse stats than everything else, I feel. But it's a mon you can get pretty early on in the game, and it has lightning rod. So it's still going to be a really valuable mon. You do want to have at least one electro type, so I think it deserves the A+ spot. Ludicolo, I think I'm going to get through this a little bit faster. Ludicolo probably A-. Good typing, maybe A because of where you get it. Good typing and stats. And Swift could be useful, it gets fake out, but you're not going to use it all the time. Shift Ray, B tier. Though it's a dark type, it does not get Sucker Punch. It's not that strong. Its moveset isn't that insane apart from Leaf Storm. It's not bulky, it's not that fast. It doesn't specialize anything. Pelipper, I think, deserves A- tier purely because of some niche fights in the game, and it's a really good dupe to get guaranteed Lapras, which is very important. It's really good against Iris and Skyla for Tailwind, and it's really good against Clay as well, because it's one of the very few things that with multi-skill that could potentially wall out Clay's Dugtrio. So I'll say because of that, all those things is A-, but you're really not going to be using it that much outside of that. Swellow. Swellow's A tier, purely because like it's fast, Guts can make it pretty strong with her turn, and once you get Facade it's pretty strong. I think maybe it could be a little bit lower. It's maybe the cusp of being A-. It's not that insane, but you get it at Route 2. Facade, Guts. It's strong when you get it, but that's basically it. Next up is Gardevoir. I think it goes A- purely because of how early you get it and because of Synchronize. I think that makes it A-, otherwise it's really not that good. It hits hard, it's got solid special defense, and then you can maybe do some funny like Lucky Chant Captivate strats to give your whole team the best ability in the game, but apart from that it's not that useful. But Synchronize is a great ability. Being able to guarantee natures is really useful, and Gallade is better. Gallade is a guaranteed Route 1 delay that you can do. Really good for Lenora, also really good for like Nicrine City N, good for Clay, really good for Torstone N, Bryson, even for Elisa. The problem with Gallade is that it's super IV reliant. With good special defense and speed, it can outspeed and wall out so many things, and another big problem is that it doesn't get close combat until level 59, which is during the Clay fight, which is really annoying. But it's potentially okay. Masquerain, probably B tier. It gets maybe A- because it gets Intimidate. It has Intimidate, and that's literally it. It has no other redeeming factors apart from Intimidate. And you're probably not going to run into it anyway. I think you only get in like Icarus City, like who cares about that. Breloom I think is A tier because when you get it before Lenora, Grass Fighting is very useful typing. It dunks on Lenora and it dunks on Clay. And with Technician and Poison Hail, really useful abilities. It can do a lot of things. You can just use Fighting Gem and smash things with Mach Punch, and you can use Spore later on. You could do Leech Seed. It can take rock hits pretty well. Pretty solid mon. Slacking is A+. I feel like it's been power crept, I think. With Slow Start, it's still a good mon, contrary to what people think. It could be Elite 4 worthy, I think. I think it could be an Elite 4 worthy mon. It's a good mon, but stat wise, its 680 stats isn't as ridiculous as it was before. And its abilities do hold it back. It is a very powerful mon. I think it could be an S- mon also. I think it could be S-. I think it definitely has potential. I haven't used it in a really long time. It is incredibly powerful. I feel like Slacking is another one of those mons that's really IV reliant. So if it's got good IVs and natures, it could definitely be in the S tier. But I think like top of A tier, for example, is a good place to put it. I think that's pretty fair. Sandslash, A- because it's good for Clay and it's good for Lisa, but apart from that, you're not going to use it that much at all, and it's going to get power crept. I feel it's fast and it's decent physical defense. It's got okayish attack. That's basically it. Swampert, for example, is usually better. I feel like with good IVs and natures it could be A tier, but that's basically it. You won't be using it that much. Ninjask, A tier for sure. Incredibly fast in bug fighting, which is really good in sniping. Really good defensive coverage actually. It's like Heracross but way faster, but not as strong. And you could do some nice pivoting strategies. It has a lot of use actually. Shedinja, probably somewhere in S tier. Honestly, this mon is just bannable. I think most people with a brain will just ban Shedinja. But I'll probably put it in S tier for now. I'll probably just put it here. The only reason why it's here and not S plus is because so many trainers have coverage moves to stop it. Which is a big thing. So many trainers have coverage moves against it. But it's something that you can abuse, definitely. You can abuse like switch AI. Stall out AI, then switch this in, then the AI just can't do anything. It's just one of those really dumb ones, I think. Xcloud. Xcloud I think is like B tier or A minus, I think. Actually, I think it's B tier purely. I think probably A minus, purely because of its coverage. Xcloud has good stats: 100 speed, 120 special attack. Hyper Voice is 100 base power normal move. It's pretty damn strong. It gets scrappy too. It has insane coverage: Flamethrower, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Mist Ball. But the curse of being a normal type sweeper just isn't that great for special attacking moves. Like at least like Linun gets Guts Facade. Xcloud just isn't that strong. But its stats and coverage means it has some use, so there's that. Hariyama, I think Hariyama's probably A minus. Like, it's good for Clay, it's great for Lenora, it's good for some other trainers, but you're just not going to be using it outside of that. Actually, I think A tier, purely because its raw stats are really good. It's really bulky, it gets fake out, 2 good abilities, but it's yet another one of those mons that are really IV nature reliant. Probopass, S+, yes, S+. Probopass is absolutely insane. It got a slight HP buff, which is great, and it gets Levitate. With Levitate, Probopass is incredible. It's so good. It walls out so many things. Incredibly good stats. Its ability is so good with its typing. It feels like an impenetrable fortress at times. Great moveset too. You can use Sandstorm. It's really good against Marshall, against Elite 4 in general. You can use Volt Switch, Flash Cannon. It gets Rest by level up, which is one of the best moves in the whole game. Rest is only at Victory Road TM, but this just gets it. Like at level 40, and you can get it pretty early on. That's insane. Such a good mon. Delcatty, B tier. It's like Furret, but way worse. Sableye, S+. It's literally Mega Sableye, but better. That can also equip an item. There's nothing more to say there. Oh yikes. Mawile, I think Mawile is A+ or S-. It gets huge power. It's incredibly powerful. The problem is Medcham could probably do its job better. Its moveset isn't the best. It's got great coverage, but Iron Head isn't the strongest move, and it's another one of those really IV reliant mons. I think this is also another one of those mons that's like at the top of its tier, or maybe like the cusp of S-. Like, honestly, I feel like it could be S-. Like, it definitely could, but it just depends on its stats. Aggron is S- though. Very good stats, great typing as single player, pairs well with Intimidate pivots, really good movesets. Rockhead, Head Smash, Sturdy is not bad too. Proven Elite 4 mon, I've used it for Elite 4 at least twice. You can use it for post game too. Yeah, what's not to love? Mecham, S tier. Very good. I'd say S-. Actually no, I'll say S tier for sure. Definitely S tier. if you get this at the start of the game, it's definite S tier. It just goes off like crazy, and you're going to be saving this for Elite 4. Elite 4 is when Metagame really shines. Not the post-game one, though you could probably use it for there too, but for the single battle Elite 4, Metagame goes off so hard, it's incredible. It one-shots everything in the team. It's just ludicrous. Close combat with huge power is stronger than anything Malwell can do. 120 base power with... Its attack stat is basically effectively 200, and you can use like Choice Scarf or Choice Band or Fighting Gem or whatever. Is so insane. It's also got like okayish defenses too, so it can actually take a hit if need be. Minetric, if it's Lightning Rod, it's A+. Intimidate, it's useful too, but if it's Lightning Rod, it's A+. Because if you get it early on, it's like really good for Elisa and lots of other Ledger types. Yet another Lightning Rod or Plusle. Plusle I think is maybe A-. Like, probably, I'd say maybe even less. Like, it's a bulky Electro type, which is just not good. Electric is not a defensive type. So slow, bulky Electro type just isn't that useful. Unfortunately, Minun is way better because this thing has 125 special attack and it's got something like 105 speed. So definitely, if it's got the right IVs, it could be A+. I think I'll put it in this tier because you're not going to be using it that often. I put A purely because you can get it before Sky a lot and it can go off there. And it will have use. But that's basically it. Volbeat I think can be an A-. Can it? Probably less. I think Volbeat is less, to be honest. Its only real redeeming quality is that you can synchronize, which is really good if you have the right nature. Like if you synchronize Adamant, for example, that's really, really good for the whole game. In that case, it will be a lot more useful. Actually, I think like if it's a good synchronize, it could be A-. Otherwise, it's just in B tier because it doesn't really do anything else. It's a bulky bug electro type, but it's not even that insanely bulky. It just doesn't serve a very good niche. Same with the Lumies. I feel the Lumies is definitely better offensively, which is fine, but there's just so many other bug and psychic types like Ledian and Beedrill and Aridos, which just does the same thing but better. It's not even that fast, it's not even that strong. I think it gets Psycho Boost and that's it. Kind of underwhelming. Roserade. I think Roserade's like A-. I think it'd be A tier. It is really strong, it got a slight buff, it gets Technician. It's really good for Clay, but you're not going to be using it much outside of that. But it still has good stats, so it counts for something. Swalot. It gets Black Sludge, but I don't think it does anything else apart from that, and its stats didn't even get buffed enough, so B tier for sure. Sharpedo deserves A tier. It gets speed boost, it has buff special attack, but its moveset is really awkward. Its strongest move is Surf, which is really unfortunate. Its strongest dark move is Crunch, and speed boost is useful, but it's really frail. You need to be super careful of how you use Sharpedo, because one wrong move and it will just faint. So you need to do a lot of like big brain baiting strats. Nidoqueen. Nidoqueen's probably like an A-. For when you get it, it's really useful because you get it for Elisa and Clay Split. Really useful for those. Not really useful after that, but because Clay Split is like one of the horror fights in the game, it's good for that. It's worth something. Wailord A+, you get it, you could potentially get it at the start of the game if you're lucky. Its stats are incredible, its special defense is like, it's like Discount Blissey. Its stats are, it's like Emerald Kaizo Wailord, its stats are humongous. Pressure also makes it PP stall, also gets rest by level up, which is really nice. Even like Wailmer, you can use Eviolite Wailmer for Lenora. It's pretty useful mon. It does get power creep later on, but even then it's still a pretty useful mon. I think it's still great. It's in special defense and 170 HP is really impressive. Camera up does A-. Really good stats. It got a big stat buff. Okay-ish typing. Good abilities with solid rock and sheer force, but it's really slow and it's weak to a lot of types. So it's hard to use because it's not a sweeper. You have to switch it in, then take another hit and kill your opponent, and then you're probably going to have to switch out after that because it's going to get outsped by whatever comes in next. It's good for Berg and Lenora, and that's kind of it. Good stats, but just hard to use effectively. Torkoal, I think. Torkoal's either A+ or maybe S tier. Is Torkoal an S tier mon? It gets shell armor with some stat buffs. Its physical defense is incredibly good. If you allow curse, then it goes off like crazy. In amnesia, but without setup, or withdraw too. Yeah, if you allow setup, it's S tier for sure. Otherwise, it's A+. Still really useful. You only get it later on in the game though. But it's got pretty solid stats with its plus 20 HP buff, and shell armor really good. There's other better shell armors though. Grumpig I feel is an A+ mon. It's a dark type with really good stats, and it's good for early game because Spoink is insane in this game. It's not that good for E4 though, and it is, but it's slow and it does not deal as much damage as other dark types because the strongest move is Dark Pulse, and it's not as good for the E4 rematch, unfortunately. That being said, it's really bulky and it can get thick fat too, so it's useful for like countering ice types and fire types. It's still really useful. I think I like it. Grumpig is a pretty safe mon to get early game. Spinda, I think it's just A tier. Really like Spinda's. It's a mono normal, but pseudo legendary with 600 base stat total means it's decent. Like it can take some hits, though it has bad typing. It can take hits and it can hit back hard, so it has that going for it. I think pseudo legendary gives it okay status. Flygon is another S- mon. I think it could potentially be S tier. I feel like Flygon is really useful. Ground Dragon with Levitate, incredible typing, pseudo legendary base stats, really good moveset like U-turn, Earthquake, Earth Power, Dragon Pulse, which got buffed. Really good for so many fights like Elite Four and Enengetsus. I think it deserves a spot. Characters A+, you get it as a gift at the very start of the game. It can get Water Absorb, which is good typing, dark type. Really high attack with Sucker Punch, A+ automatically. Zankus is A tier. It's only A tier if it's in Toxic Boost, otherwise it's just not good, I feel. There's several Guts users in this tier. Altaria is B tier. It's really underwhelming, unfortunately, though I really like Altaria. Bulky dragon flying with underwhelming stats. It's designed around using Dragon Dance, but most people with a brain just ban Dragon Dance, so you won't be using that. It's basically Salamates at home. If it's got good IVs in natures, it could definitely be more. It can have some use, but it's really situational. It's a mon that you just don't care about sacking. So yeah, Seviper's A tier because good attack, dark type with Intimidate and Sucker Punch. Not as good as Cacturn, but still pretty good mon. And Poison Dark is actually kind of useful for some instances. Lunatone I think is A tier because great stats, Sturdy or Levitate, Ghost Rock, really useful typing abilities and stats. Solrock is A- because it hits like a nuke, and Flash Fire and Levitate could be useful, but that's it. It's not that fast, it's not that bulky. It's kind of niche. It's Typhlosion but way slower essentially, and it's actually not as strong as Typhlosion, so it's just way worse Typhlosion. Wish Cash I feel is a B tier mon, really. I think Wish Cash you only get it like pretty late into the game, and by that point it's like, who even cares about Wish Cash? Like, adaptability is good. Adaptability, actually, maybe A tier because adaptability. But it's like, apart from that, it's like, it's so underwhelming. Crawdont, a really slept on mon. S tier for sure. Maybe S, I think it could be S. Also, it could be an S tier. If you get like a Pog Crawdont early game, it will be useful for like the whole game, and for Elite Four. It is very useful, very good mon. I really like Crawdont. It's really underrated and pretty good defensive stats. Water Dark with Shell Armor, and it gets knockoff. Very good. You can use it for a lot of fights. Resists a lot of things. Claydol I think is A-. Maybe A tier. It's really good for Clay, but that's in Elisa, but that's it. You'll use it for like the occasional immunity, and that's pretty much it. You're just going to use other stuff instead. It has solid stats, but kind of power crept. Cordeli, if it's Storm Drain, it's definitely A+. Really good stats. Nice typing. Storm Drain's incredibly good. AI doesn't really know how to play around Storm Drain. Once you get Storm Drain going, you just use Giga Drain and you go off like crazy. It's wild. Urmaldo also A+ for sure. Guaranteed mon for Berg. Really pivotal for beating Berg. Shell Armor, Rock Slide goes off like crazy. It does fall off for sure, but because it's a guaranteed mon and you will be using it for 1 or 2 key fights, it's a guaranteed mon that kind of Shell Armor. It's automatically really useful. It's pretty important part of the game, I feel. Needle King is also A-, same as Needle Queen exactly. Milotic, I feel it's maybe A tier, maybe A-. It's like, it's a good specially defensive water type. I know, I think A tier. It's just power crept, I feel. Like Vaporeon. I feel Vaporeon might actually be better, and Wailord's most likely better, and Lapras is way better. You just don't need it for any major fights. It's stuff that you don't mind losing, really. Castform, A tier. It's bulky, so pseudo legendary 100 base stat in each stat. Normal type, but that's basically it. You don't really need it for much else. Yeah, it looks like a fucking ball sack. And yeah, what else can I say? Kecleon, definitely A+, maybe I don't think it's S-. I know people think it's S tier, but it does become less useful as the game progresses, and normal Ghost just isn't as good as Dark types. Dark types are just better for beating Psychic types. Kecleon, you can use it for Elite Four. I feel like other mons can do its role better. That being said, because it's so useful for the first half of the game, it definitely deserves like upper end of A+ for sure. Maybe, I think it probably is S- to be honest. I think that's a fair place to put it for now. Banette, S tier for sure. Incredibly useful. Ghost Dark with Sucker Punch, really good. Good speed, gets knockoff in 9 days. Incredibly good for both Elite Fours. Probably the best Dark type in the whole game. Like, one of the best Dark types you can possibly get in a game. It's so good. Dusknoir is like A-, because by the time you get to this thing in Celestial Tower, you just don't need it. It has good stat buffs, but it's like you don't need that much by then. The Levitate is nice, but that's basically it. Tropius is B tier. It's got some niche uses, and that's it. Chimecho, I think it's A tier or A+. Maybe at the top of A. No, I think it would be A+, because Steel Psychic with Levitate is really useful typing. I feel like it is IV reliant, but Chimecho definitely has some good stuff going on for it. I actually brought it to Elite Four once, so it's a usable Elite Four mon too. Absol, A plus for sure, because of Sucker Punch. Strong dark type with Sucker Punch. It could be S tier. You could probably it could be a pivotal Elite Four mon. Like it's justified in Super Luck. You could maybe abuse Super Luck actually. Sorry, justified. Good speed, really good attack. Frail. What the hell? Wait, is this working? Oh, sorry. Wait, anyways, I'm sure it gets Sucker Punch. Yeah, it could probably be an S- mon because of his Elite Four viability and just destroys so many Psychic and Ghost types. Frostlass, I think potentially A tier because you get it right before Clay. It can get Levitate, which is really good for Duck Trio. I think it's a pretty useful mon. Good for Skyla and Berg and potentially Bryson too. Decent stats. I think is a fair place to put it. Walrun's also A tier. Really good for Skyla, Bryson, and Iris. Good stats, and it's a really good dupe to get guaranteed mons in Icarus City and Route 8 and Lure of Icarus, which all have the same characters, so really useful there. Huntail feels also an A tier because Water Dark with really good stats. I think it deserves A tier. Corpus I think also deserves A tier because pretty good stats, Water Psychic with Water Absorb. And has some pretty good moves. It's a pretty good special attacker. It's also really good against Clay. Relicanth, I think I put in A tier because yes, you can get Relicanth at the start of the game, but you wouldn't go for it. It's a great mod to get at the start of the game, don't get me wrong, but there's just other mods you'd rather get instead. And though Relicanth is good when you get it later on, there's just other mods that are better. So I think A tier is a fair place to put it. Clefable's just bad, unfortunately. It literally, no buffs, it just does nothing. It's one of the worst mods in the whole game. Actually, no, I think it's C tier. I don't think it does anything, really. Love Disc is A+. Water Fairy with 120 special attack and outspeeds so many things, and has Storm Drain, and has flipping 150 base power water move. This thing's insane. Water Fairy, no, it's not a fairy type, what am I talking about? But yeah, this thing is an absolute glass cannon monster. Salamence, probably S tier. Good typing, good stats, Intimidate. You only get it like later on in the game, but it can be really impactful once you do get it. It's great Elite Four mon. You can use it for the Elite Four rematch too. Really useful. It's similar to Gyarados, that's how I would say. Gyarados is probably better purely because you get it early on. But Salamence, as a whole, Salamence is one of the better mons in the whole game. Metagross, I feel S- or A+, one of the two. With Iron Fist, it's probably S-, maybe in the lower end of S-. Because there are lots of other really good Psychic types too. Metagross isn't as ridiculously overpowered, but it's still a very good mon that you can use. Regis, and we're almost at the end. Regis, the problem with Regis is that, like Regirock, is that is an A+ tier mon for sure. The problem is, like, you literally get this at the end of the game. Like, you get Regirock, and the game's over. And, like, you don't need it for post-game at all. So by that logic, it would be a B tier mon, because you literally don't get to use it in the entire game. I think it's an A tier mon, purely because you can use it against Elite Four. You can use it against Chantal, and potentially against Grimsley too. That's it. That's the only reason why it's like somewhat useful. It is like don't get me wrong, if Regirock was encounterable before Lenora, it would be like S tier for sure, but you know, getting it in victory at the end of Victory Road is like, you're only going to use it for like 2 fights, if even that. You're probably not going to use it at all most of the time. Most people don't even catch it anymore. So yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. Registeel I think is A tier. It's a good mon, you can use it for Elite 4, but most people just won't go for it because you would rather get other stuff in the guidance chamber anyways. It's a good mon for sure, but you just don't need it, unfortunately. I feel it's like Aggron and Kingler just better. Regice I feel is A plus though, because you get this in its own area with no other encounter, so you'll always get this, potentially before Bryson, and its special defense is so incredible. You will be using it before the end of the game, and it will trivialize a lot of special attackers, so it's really good for that. It's one of the few mono ice types that are actually really good. I like Regice, and you can actually use it for N and Getsus too if you want. Decent coverage too. Ooh, Rayquaza. Now, I know people are going to be thinking, Rayquaza? What? Let's put this thing here. Rayquaza is the only post-game mon that is on this list. Because I am taking post-game into account, I know I'm not going to rank all the Gen 4 and 5 encounters because otherwise I'll be here all night, and most of them are extremely hard to get consistently. Rayquaza is basically the guaranteed post-game encounter, and you will almost always use Rayquaza for the Elite 4 rematch. It is very, very good for that, and its stats, it's the big legendary of the game. It deserves its position at the top of S+, it deserves it. Like, I know you're literally only using it for one fight, but it's the hardest fight in the game, and it works so well for that, and it's flipping Rayquaza. It deserves it. So, almost done. Ninetale, it's a mono fire type. It's good early game, but after early game you'll just never use it. It could be A- if it's like good stats with flash fire, but that's literally it. Venusaur could be really good. Potentially A+ if it's thick fat. Maybe A+ between those two. It's really good if you get it early game. Wigglytuff I think deserves A- because it's got really good stats, which makes up for its like not useful typing. Potentially it could be A tier actually. Could be A tier actually. Probably A- between these two. I think that's pretty fair. Crobat A+. You can get it really early on. Incredibly good attacking stats. Incredibly fast. Really good coverage. Great typing. You'll use it a lot throughout the game. It'll really contribute. What else is there? Some Gen 4 Blossom. A-. Like, it's got good stats, but its mono grass isn't that useful. And it has some early game usage. Some niche usage. Paris also. Paris is like B tier, I think. Maybe A-, purely because dry skin. Like, I don't know, between B and A-, like, dry skin is good. The stats and typing are just so underwhelming. It's so hard to use, and it's not going to outspeed anything. Almost anything could just hit this super effectively, or it could just hit it, then hit it again and crit and take it out. Too hard to use. So, let's see. A lot of Gen 5 mons here. Dugtrio. Oh, okay. For sure, A+. With the right stats is S tier for sure. It's 120 speed, 152 physical attack with ground fighting. The thing is flipping ridiculous. It's not as good as Medicham, but yeah, Dugtrio is a funny ass mon. It's definitely S tier if you get it like at the start of the game, which is very unlikely, but it can happen. So what else is there? Persian A- because Fake Out, Technician, Hyper Voice is kind of strong and it's fat. It's like Ambipom essentially. Basically the same reason for Ambipom. I think it's got better coverage, but that's basically it. Is there anything here that I'm missing out? See, Gen 5 Mons. Golduck. Okay, a guaranteed gift encounter. I'll say A tier. purely because it's guaranteed. And you can use it for a few fights. And it's a consistent mon, and with Swiss Swim it can be good for rival fights where you just minute for rain, but that's literally it. If it's damp, you can just sack it after mid-game, really. You don't need it that much. Oh, Venom off. I almost even forgot this thing because I never use it in my run ever. I've never caught this thing. B tier, potentially C tier. Well, it's not C tier bad because it has some niche with its typing, but it's just bad. It's like Beautifly, same reason as Beautifly, bad stats, not great for anything. You just don't need it. So Archeops, Primate. If it's Defiant, definitely A tier. With Defiant, it hits like a truck because there's a lot of intimidators you can manipulate against. Arcanine is really underwhelming. Like, you can get it at the start of the game, but I feel like if it's Flash Fire, I think A- purely because of early game viability. But apart from that, it's a pretty bad mon. It's really overrated. I think people overrate it. Intimidate could have 1 or 2 uses, but that's literally it. But I don't know why these are all mixed up. Polyraph, okay, perfect. Polyraph, controversially, I think S-. S- Polyraph. If you're lucky, you get it in Straight and City. Gets Water Absorb, great typing, great stats, really good moveset, really viable throughout the game, incredibly good for Elite 4 rematch, is a proven mon for post game. S- because it's so useful for the whole game, and you want this for Elite 4 rematch. You want to keep it alive for that. Really good. It's one of the only mons that gets access to Drain Punch and Mach Punch, which is really unique, and it gets Rain Dance too. Both abilities are good too. Politoed though is nowhere near as good, probably B tier. It's a somewhat bulky water type that I think it can get Water Absorb, and that's literally it. It is so ununique and bland. There's just no real reason to use it over any other water type, unless it's like super situational. Thunderous? Now, most of you won't know this, but Thunderous is actually in this game. Same way how it is in Base White. Roaming legendary, and you can get it before post game. You can get it right after you beat Iris. Though you won't be using this for the main game at all. Thunderous is incredibly useful for post-game rematch, Elite 4 and older. It's Pidgeot but better, and it's a legendary, so I think that special status gives it some special treatment. So S-, purely because of like how late you get it. It's not S+ or anything. You have Alakazam. Alakazam is just really A- because it's bad mono-psychic, and it's like it's so frail, so you can't really switch it in. And it's like if Alakazam can't one-shot what's in front of it, there's just no point in using it because it'll probably just get KO'd, so you won't need it at all. Like, it gets Aura Sphere, which could make it useful in Thunderbolt. Synchronize could make it useful. I think it could be like at the top of A-, purely because of Synchronize. So yeah, I ran out of storage there, so I had to like delete some stuff and make some space. But Machamp, it didn't get a stat buff like Alakazam, so I feel like it's been power crept. Guts in No Guard are good abilities, but it's not that bulky and it's not that fast. I feel like a mon, like, you want bulk, power, and speed. You need at least 2 of those 3 things. Machamp isn't great. It's really good when you get it in the game against Lenora, but I feel like it's just not that viable throughout the whole game. So I think A-, maybe at the upper end of A- is a pretty fair place to put it. I think that's almost literally I think there's a few more mons. I don't know why there's Gen 1, there's all Gen 1 mons here for some reason. Charizard, A-, okayish typing, fire type, not good, it's whatever. Victory Bell, I think A- or A. Probably A because you get it at Route 2 and it got a significant buff, so it's actually not garbage this time around. Tentacruel A tier purely because pretty good stats, good typing. It can take out a lot of water type Pokemon. Golem also is potential A+, I think A tier because it does fall off later on, but it's really good early game and it's like Rhyperior at home, so I think it's a fair point to put it, but you do get it pretty early on. Rapidash is the guaranteed gift mon if you pick Mudkip, however it's the worst one. Fire type just isn't that useful. After Berg you won't be using it that much. You can use it for like a really strong Flare Blitz and that's it, maybe occasional Wild Charge or Drill Run, but it's not that useful. There's just other sweepers you'd rather use instead. Slowbro's really useful. I would say A+. You get it late on in the game, but it's really useful with a Regenerator. It's good for ending guesses, and you'll use it for some trainers. Not that many, but it's really useful when you do guess it. Slowking I think is also good, but just not as good because it's a special wall, but there's so many other special walls like Lapras, like potentially Blissey, Wailord, Milotic, that can just do Slowking's job but better. Magnezone, this deserves an S tier. Steel type with good stats and Levitate in pivoting and good typing. It's, yeah, what else to say, Steel type with Levitate is just insane. Look at Probopass, it's not that good, but Farfetch'd, maybe A tier because of Defiant. No, I think A- because it's really hard to use. It's not very fast. And you don't get Choice Scarf until end the game. So it's useful but only for very niche circumstances, like against Clay maybe. It's just pretty situational to use. Dodrio, okay. If Dodrio is Defiant, it is S tier for sure, I think. Dodrio is an S tier mon with Defiant, it's absolutely wild. 130 attack, really high speed. Defiant basically gives it a free +1, it goes off like crazy. It's an insane glass cannon in the right circumstances. Good coverage too. Dodrio's really slept on powerhouse. Dugong is very similar to, I think it's a bit better than Walrein purely because of Fake Out. Fake Out means Dugong's a bit better than Walrein, essentially. Muck, I think Muck is potentially A or A+. Does it get Sucker Punch? I've never actually used Muck. I think it does. It does get Sucker Punch, yeah, A+ for certain. Pretty strong and pretty specially bulky. Poison Dart type, so it gets Black Sludge and it gets Sucker Punch. That's automatically high tier. It's really good. Cloyster, I think it's A-. Like, you get it so late in the game, but Skill Link and Shell Armor are both really good abilities. It's good for Iris because of an Icicle Spear, and Shell Armor's always great, but you just get it too late for it to be that impactful. Gengar's also A- because it's just an awkward mon, kind of like Alakazam. It doesn't have very strong moves. Like, strongest move is like 90 is like Sludge Bomb, and it's not even that great. It has some nice coverage like Aura Sphere, like maybe Thunderbolt, but it's just a situational mon. You can, it's good for like some Chern fights and that, but you're not going to be using it all that often. Steelix, I would say, like, squeezes into S-. I think it just makes it in. It's a bit worse than Aggron, but it's still a really good mod. If you get it early game, it is really goated because it will carry you through so many fights. But it's basically Aggron, but just just doesn't hit as hard, and is potentially better at pivoting in some situations. But still a really good mon. Hypno, now this includes Drowsy. So Drowsy, Hypno, like, I know Drowsy for example is a lot better. I would put it in A+, but I will put it at the very top of A+, or maybe the very bottom of S-. Early game is absolutely incredible. It's probably the best early game mod you can get, Drowsy, but it drops off for sure. Mono Psychic just isn't that good at the end of the game. There's so many dark and ghost types you need to fight. It's just not that good at walling out anymore. You'll get stuff like Lapras instead, so because it falls off late game, it's still good, but it'll just fall off. Top of A+. Blastoise. Blastoise can go probably A+. If it's Regenerator and you get it at Stratton City really early on and it gets Regenerator, yeah, A+. It's really good mon, I think. It's really good against Charon's Flareon. It can tank a lot of the really strong Flare Blitzes that come your way. And Regenerator is always really nice. It's basically Kingdra but better. Significantly better, so I think this is a fair place to put Blastoise, and good stats with its stat buffs, Regenerator, great typing. The final mon, probably the most popular mon in this whole game, flipping Pogler, Pog Crab, and this deserves the S+ tier. Kingler, the final mon in the whole tier list, yikes. Kingler is very, very good. It really is. Kingler is just sublime. Water Steel, really good stats, and it gets Shell Armor, and you can get it really early on in the game. It completely bunks on like every gym leader, actually literally every gym leader apart from Elisa. Kingler goes off on every gym leader. Really good stats, you get it before Lenora. The best ability in the game, probably one of the best typing in the whole game. Really good moveset. Crab Hammer is just like 100 base power water move with no downside in a boosted crit rate. It also pivots extremely well with Gyarados because it baits like fighting and ground moves, which Gyarados can switch in, Intimidate, then like bait a rock move, go back into Kingler and just rinse and repeat. It's definitely up there with Donphan and Lapras. Kingler, Donphan, and Lapras are all amazing Shell Armor, Battle Armor mons, but for different reasons. Lapras is probably the best. Kingler has the best typing for defending. It has the best pivot ability and also hits the hardest. Donphan is the best once it uses Charm for taking physical hits. And Lapras is the best for tanking special hits. And it's also the best for stalling out with Growl and Recover. The other two, they don't have any recovery, they only get rest at Victory Road. But overall, this is basically an encompassed tier list. This is a pretty long and extensive tier list. This video went on for like a few hours. It's pretty exhausting. Something to say, I think that this game is very varied. Almost nothing in this game is completely useless, like the amount of low tier mons are actually very minimal. Even B tier mons have some use in the game and will see some play and can help you through certain points. A tier mons and above, they're all useful to some extent. Like they will help you. Like the rest are all Gen 5 mons, which you do get in post game, but it's too hard to rank all these. That was really hard to do, and you could probably tell at the end that I was getting really tired from my voice. But here's the entire tier list. You can see overall, the tier list is so big, I literally can't display all of it in one, because otherwise the mons would be too small, you wouldn't be able to see them. But yeah, that was wild. Really fun to do though, so hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe and all that, and yeah, I'll see you guys pretty soon for some more content.